Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions in life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host Aditi Kuti. Let's get on with the show. Welcome back to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast. I am here today with Arsho Kalloghlian, who is a practicing psychotherapist from Sydney, so not very far from us. Arsho, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aditi. Thanks for having me.
I'm really pleased to have you on. We're going to be talking today about the link between personal growth and romantic compatibility in a little more detail. But first, tell the audience a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I have this passion about relationships that developed a few years into being in a relationship myself. So I went on to this journey about finding out what does love actually mean and how can you determine if it's going to last or not. So that's how I ended up where I am today.
Yeah, that's a pretty persisting question, I think, for a lot of people. And not an easy one, I expect, to answer, unless you do have all of the answers up to that.
All of it, but I do have some answers. Yeah, that's how I started going to uni to get my degree in psychotherapy and to understand relationships better. And I also came across this amazing relationship skills modality that has kind of put the picture as a whole together for me.
Awesome. Well, I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about that, if I understand, in this episode today.
Yeah.
Really excited. But first, we've got a segment called Have You Met Arsho Kalloghlian, in which I ask you a few questions about yourself. Are you happy to answer them?
Sure, absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah. What is your favorite book?
At the moment, it's Mindsight by Dan Siegel. And I love how he talks about seeing things, stepping out and looking in and really connecting with people instead of just glazing over them, being able to see what's going on beneath the surface. So, yeah, it's all about living mindfully, if you like.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that. I think mindfulness seems to be a surprisingly common theme. When I started the show, I didn't expect it to be so prevalent in the area of relationships and romantic love, but it seems to come up quite a lot.
Yeah. So I think living mindfully in general is a really good way to approach life, because quite often it's so easy to just get caught up in the busyness of life and not really be thinking about, how does our life look? Is it the way we want it to look? Are we heading somewhere? How are we going to get there? So really making mindful decisions on an ongoing basis is a good way to live.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. What about a favorite movie?
I'm not really a big movie watcher, but the kind of movies that I do like are things like Patch Adams and Good Will Hunting. The kind of movies that kind of give you an insight into the human psyche and who we are and, what makes us tick, and resilience and the overcoming spirit. Those are the kind of things that I love.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know you kind of mentioned a theme of movies there, but do you have one in particular that you tend to be drawn to or watch over and over again, or wouldn't mind watching a second time?
I've watched Dead Poets Society a couple of times, but yeah, I don't mind watching most of those. Like Beautiful Mind is another one that comes to mind. There isn't one that sticks out, if you like, but
yeah,
those kind of genre is my favorite pastime, if you like.
Yeah, no, that's so fine. I think Dead Poets
Yeah.
Society is one of my favorite movies as well, so I totally understand it.
Yeah.
Uh, do you have a podcast that you have been listening to lately that you've been really into?
No. No, I hate to say this, but I don't really listen to podcasts, and I don't watch movies as much. I yeah, I love my work, and I'm really busy with my work, and that kind of takes up a lot of my time. And I guess when I'm not working, my go-to place is to go for a walk. Going for a walk, just doing something active rather than sitting in front of a screen or listening or hearing things.
Yeah, no, totally understandable. To each their own, I suppose. You could just say our podcast is your favorite, but that's
It will be. It will be. I definitely intend to spend more time listening to your podcasts
for
to find
sure.
out more about it. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. What about a famous role model that you've looked up to in the past?
That was a difficult one. I often think about that, but I quite often I find that human beings are human beings. It doesn't matter how intelligent, famous, or successful they are. I think there's this great equalizer that makes us all human. And no, there isn't any one particular model that I look up to. But having been a Christian recently, I think Christ will have to be one of my role models. That's wisdom, compassion for people, not being reactive. That's the kind of yeah, that's the kind of person I strive to be, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would consider that to be a famous role model. He is quite famous after all. So
Yeah,
I think that counts.
yeah. Oh, good. There you go.
What about the last course that you completed?
That would have to be. Oh, there's quite a few. The last one would be doing my bachelor degree would be the one that I've completed. Since then, I've done lots of mini courses to do with psychology and relationships. So that would be one of the big ones that I've completed that I'm really quite proud of.
Yeah. I think a bachelor's degree is a pretty big one. So I'm with you on that. Cool. So that brings us to the end of that segment. We've gotten to know you now, and we're going to move on to our main topic, which is looking at the link between personal growth and romantic compatibility. I wanted to start off very broadly. Our show is about relationships. So how do you define a relationship?
Well, relationship is when two people are connected and involved in each other's life. There's a lot of people we come across in and out, even at work where you're not really in relationship with, you're more of an acquaintance. So I guess I would define a relationship as someone that you have a connection with, an ongoing interaction with.
Yeah, for sure. And do you feel like, our show's about romantic relationships. Do you feel like they're the same as they were maybe decades ago? Do they have the same structure, or are they perhaps as important as they were decades ago?
I think relationships are as important. The structure may have changed somewhat, whereas I think decades ago, uh, the man was the kind of the head of a relationship. His career was more important. His role was more defined as very separate and different to the woman's role. But I love that in this day and age, there's more equality in placing importance on both careers being just as important and sharing, roles such as mundane things like housework. And I love that there is a lot more equality.
Yeah, for sure. There's like the institution of the relationship has changed quite a bit since the
Yes,
past.
yes, definitely. On the same token, though, I have found that through my work, perhaps I'm more exposed to it than most people would be, that it has also, relationships have become somewhat more disposable, that people tend to give up on it way too quickly when there is so much that can be done to make the relationship better over time. And I feel people generally don't have the patience to work through difficult times.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that's come up a lot in the show, in that people are just more willing to move on from relationships that don't suit them, or they're just not taking the time to fully understand the relationship that they're in and the person that they've chosen to form a relationship with.
Yeah, that is true. And at the same time, I think expectations have changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think the expectations are in some instances quite unrealistic
Mm-hmm.
of the relationship. I don't know whether Hollywood has a lot to do with that, where there is this ideal of how a relationship is supposed to play out. And if it doesn't fit in with a person's ideal, they kind of, try to sort of discard it and move on to the next one and then to the next one, and not really realizing that fulfillment actually comes from putting in the hard yard, putting in the work and really being invested in it. There's going to be differences anyway, and just kind of trying to understand before being understood. Just putting in the effort to make the relationship better.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I guess kind of aligned with that is what is relationship compatibility? Because you were talking, about the media and how it may or may not have a role in shaping unrealistic expectations about compatibility, about relationships in general. I assume compatibility is definitely a part of that. There's this expectation that you're going to meet the one, and it's going to be magical, and you're going to know instantly that they're the right person for you.
Yeah. I'm glad you actually put it exactly in those words, because here's what has been found is that falling in love, or being in love with someone, does not actually ensure happiness in a relationship. So compatibility is also an interesting topic, because you may not have much in common with the other person, but those differences can actually work together to make the relationship better. But what is often happening is that when the goals don't align, or the bigger picture, kind of what they want to accomplish in their lives, don't necessarily align, that they think, the relationship can't work. But in fact, there's always more than one way of looking at things. An example of that would be, when one partner works evenings and the other one is, at home in the evenings, and they work during the day, and they feel like they want their partner to be around all the time. And, the question I would ask is that, what about spending time with your own friends during the time when your partner is not around? And they say, actually, I've never even thought of that, because, they're too busy being upset that, it's not the way they imagined things were going to be. They're very different. So sometimes when you start looking at things from a different perspective, you can actually make it work. Those differences, you can actually make it work, and even begin to enjoy them.
Yeah, for sure. I would assume it's there's those expectations, but there's also a difference in the willingness to work towards finding some sort of balance, or some sort of happy middle ground between, because it's like one party can be willing to work through the differences, but the other one not so much.
Yeah, that's very true. And that's often the case when people have had traumatic experiences in life. They will find that, that creative thinking, being able to come up with a solution that's going to be win-win, or it's going to be different, that is often compromised when people have had traumatic experiences in life, whether that's, in their developmental years, or whether it's based on past relationships that haven't worked out quite the way they wanted to work out. So those things could be an impediment. And that is when, having counseling sessions where someone can talk about different perspectives can be, a way of working around it instead of feeling like you're stuck and you can't see a way out of it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I guess the question that I might have unintentionally buried in there is how do you actually define relationship compatibility? Because I feel like we need to know what it is in order to understand how it contributes and also doesn't contribute to our relationships.
Compatibility, I think it is important to discuss what is really, really important as soon as it is possible, as soon as you can. Because compatibility could be anything from, deciding on whose career will take priority. If one person's career is going to take them to be traveling a lot, how important it is that, your partner doesn't travel or they're with you all the time. Or, whether to have children or not to have children, or where to live. So I think it's important to communicate what is, deal breaker for you before getting too seriously involved in a relationship. All differences can be worked out if there's a willingness on, at least one party to say, I'm willing to, put aside my ambitions or my goals in order to be with you because you're more important to me than those things are. And on the same token, say that, although I really want to be in a relationship, but my career takes priority at this stage in my life.
Yeah, for sure. What are the key factors that contribute to personal growth within a romantic relationship? Because, we've been talking about how there is the relationship and there might be, ways in which two people click, but there's all these external forces that might not necessarily make them good for each other.
Yeah, I think self-awareness would have to be one of the big ones when it comes to personal development. The person first needs to be aware that they do need to, there's always room for improvement. It's really difficult to be with someone who feels that there's nothing wrong with them. Whenever things go wrong, it's always the other person's fault. So, and always feeling like their way is the right way and the other way is the wrong way. So I think it begins with having enough self-awareness to realize that, I'm not perfect. There's so much room for improvement. I do want to improve and I welcome feedback instead of getting upset when someone says, you do this wrong or you shouldn't do that or, you're wrong in this matter. Instead of getting upset about it, trying to find out, why do they feel it's wrong? What can I do to improve? Or how can I, view or do things differently? So yes, I would say self-awareness is the beginning of personal growth.
Yeah, for sure. What are kind of are there ways that a couple can grow together? So like engage in personal growth together as opposed to doing their own things separately and making compromises to support each other doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think being open to feedback from each other. I think that would be the ideal. To say that, where instead of critical and judgmental, always criticizing each other, to actually offer feedback. It's like, when you do this a certain way, this is how it makes me feel. And I would, appreciate it if you did it this way instead, or if you could communicate that way instead, and always offering each other feedback and welcoming feedback. It's like inviting the other person to say, if there is something that I do that really upsets you, please do let me know, because I do want to grow. I do want to learn. I do want to be, in a healthier relationship with you. And just finding that middle ground, I think that would be the ideal, but two people contributing to each other's growth, that would be the healthiest way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the kind of obstacles? What are some of the obstacles that couples might face when doing that?
I think being offended, if someone's easily offended or they don't know a healthy way of disagreeing, where they feel, if the other person can't see it their way, then, that's unacceptable, that, this is how it's always been done. This is how I've always done it. And, being really inflexible. And again, I have to mention that, as a psychotherapist, trauma does play a huge part in that. Is that when a person has experienced a lot of trauma, they do tend to be more rigid and more reactive. And it's very important when the other partner recognizes that, to say that, it would be good to actually talk through some of these things with someone who is not emotionally involved in the situation, because we might not always feel comfortable talking about everything. And to have someone outside the situation, the relationship, to talk to those things about would be ideal. So yeah, trauma can cause a person to be more rigid and inflexible and reactive. So it's important to recognize those attributes as trauma and to help the person overcome them, instead of, just saying they're impossible to live with, and, not understanding why they are the way that they are.
Yeah, I feel like that also comes back down to self-awareness, which is what you mentioned as one of the most important aspects to develop within yourself when entering a relationship. Yeah. How do you, are there any kind of specific like traits or behaviors in a person that tend to support personal growth in a relationship? Like what can we do to be supportive of our partner? I know that, we've talked about listening and being open to feedback, but is there anything else?
I think compassion, as opposed to, it's so easy to get judgmental and critical and offensive and defensive when things get a bit heated. I think when you approach the relationship as being the most important thing, and doing things and saying things that are going to nurture the relationship instead of cause it to deteriorate, that would be a really good start in, being supportive of personal growth in our partners and in ourselves. It's to take the higher ground, not to get too emotionally reactive, to step back and think about things and say, how can I do this differently so that it doesn't lead to the same argument again? We've been down this road before. How can we do this better? Being reflective about what's working, what's not working, and think about how can it be done differently.
Yeah, for sure. I know like we've now been talking about a lot of ways that you can kind of grow, like experience personal growth and work towards personal growth while also remaining committed to each other, part of which is um, setting those boundaries right at the beginning and knowing what you can do and can't do. But at what point how do you recognize if your personal growth journeys are getting in the way of a relationship? What are the warning signs of that um, kind of that romantic link kind of fraying for whatever reason due to our own personal ambitions?
Well, the thing is that when one person in the relationship has the emotional maturity, the higher EQ, and they're able to manage the relationship in a way that they are actually role modeling what a healthy response looks like, they can help the other person's EQ also be raised. So, when you say, well, how do you know the relationship isn't working, or when do you decide that, it's time to end it? There is actually no certain way. It all depends on at least one person in the relationship being more emotionally mature enough to say, okay, I understand why you're reacting the way that you are. And, being creative in how they problem solve, being creative in how they communicate, taking a higher road, if you like, and saying, how can I role model compassion? How can I role model respect? How can I role model an understanding communication? How can I role model acceptance and valuing the other person in a way that they feel understood, they feel heard? So it actually only takes one person in the relationship to make the relationship work. And if one person is willing to make the relationship better by self-development, it invites the other person to also, by default, respond positively, because that you're not both reacting, you're not both allowing the relationship to deteriorate.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's kind of the personal efforts that you make, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding you in any way, but the personal efforts that you make will hopefully be infectious and spread to your partner as well. And that way, the danger of having values that are perhaps out of balance or no longer match each other anymore is reduced. Is that correct?
Exactly. Spot on. Yes. Because here's the thing, you can't change another person, but when you change your responses, when you change your behavior, it by default changes how the other person responds to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really difficult not to respect someone who loves you. It's really difficult not to like someone back when they do, when they're understanding towards you and they take the first step in order to show, what love means and how they support you and how they care for you and it matters to them how you feel. It matters to them, what you think about things. And what that does is it just by default, it changes the other person's behavior towards you.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's kind of like, my question would be, and I don't know, again, if this is the wrong question to ask, is that, when does it actually become irreversible? Like, I know that's a very different point for every individual. Everyone has their own deal breakers and their own compromises that they're not willing to make. But like, at what point does the more emotionally mature person need to step back for themselves?
Yes, so there's two cases in which the relationship, has no choice but to end. And that's when one person has emotionally left the relationship and they're just not interested in improving it. And the other would be if there's abuse. That's a deal breaker in any case. Because in order to say, I'll change the person, I'll be good enough for them not to abuse anymore, will not work. The other person will need to seek help for themselves in order for things to change.
Yeah, I feel like that's the time when a personal growth goal really doesn't align with any kind of relationship, really. Like, that's a person that needs to learn by themselves.
Absolutely, yeah, and gain help. If they do want to remain in the relationship, they do need to seek help and, address why they are the way they are, why they are being abusive.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that brings me to the end of, I guess, the main part of our show. I now want to move on to our practice/habit experiment debrief, where we deep dive a little into a way that we can take what we've talked about today and apply it to practice in the real world. So, Arsho, did you have a practice that you have either done yourself or you have recommended to clients to help foster their personal growth that will then enhance their relationship compatibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say working on improving emotional maturity, EQ.
Okay.
That is something that every human being can do if they have enough self-awareness. IQ is pretty set, from birth, a person's IQ, but EQ is something that every human being can develop. And I think, first of all, finding out what high functioning, high EQ looks like, and then, making an effort to raise your own EQ, which in return actually does cause to raise the EQ of those you are in relationship with, such as, letting go of offenses and, forgiving easily and asking for forgiveness easily, caring about relationships more than you care about your own selfish needs. And, there's one thing that I hear quite often is that, I just want to be happy. That's my main. I just want to be married and I want to be happy. I want to be in a relationship and I want to be happy. Happiness is a funny thing because the more you chase it, the more you lose it. When you discover that happiness is how you contribute to making another person happy, that is how you gain more happiness. That becomes kind of a positive reinforcement instead of a downward spiral. Sure. And that is when you discover what true happiness is when you discover the happiness of, making someone else happy. How can I contribute into making the other person's life better?
Yeah, exactly. I does apologizing factor into emotional intelligence in any way? I feel like, I don't know, I feel like apologizing is like one of the hardest things you can do to another person, at least in my experience. Is that something that you have noticed, that people struggle to apologize like genuinely?
Yeah, it is difficult to apologize, very much so. But here's the thing with emotional maturity is that when you realize or recognize that I'm flawed and every human being is flawed, no one is perfect. And when you accept that, it becomes a lot easier to apologize and also to forgive. So when your standards or expectations of people are really low to non-existent, then, whatever good comes out of a relationship, you're just really grateful for it. And when it doesn't measure up to the way you think, they should behave or what they should do or what they shouldn't say, all those things, it's like, oh, of course, I do that too. I say the wrong thing. I do the wrong thing. I don't always mean it. Sometimes I mean it, but, I shouldn't do it. And just, I think, recognizing that we're all flawed is a great step to humbling yourself and, saying that, oh, okay, I did mess up and I'm really sorry. And there is such a freedom in that. When you discover it is so freeing to be able to apologize, it's like it takes a weight off you instead of not wanting to apologize and having to defend. And, and quite often what you find is that when you apologize and the other person knows that you were right, but you're apologizing anyway, quite often they will respond in a way that shows you that, they know you were right, but they're just not willing to admit it because, pride often gets in the way.
Of course, of course. What's a kind of a practice or a habit that someone can do to cultivate emotional intelligence, EQ?
I think having realistic expectation of people and yourself, recognizing that we are all flawed and starting from that base where when you start from there, then you're not easily offended when people say or do the wrong thing. When you're quick to forgive, it's like, oh, it's okay. That's fine. Even if you meant it, that's okay. I can let go. You'll find that that's where you gain more peace and joy. It's to be able to let go of things and say, it's fine. You don't have to be perfect. I'm not perfect either. It just takes a really big load off your shoulders in trying to just, bring people to justice by punishing them, because they've said or done the wrong thing. It's like just being able to let go, and you'll find that life is more pleasurable that way.
Yeah, no, exactly. Is there like an exercise people can engage in, or like a daily kind of habit that they can do once a day or once a week or something that kind of helps with that at all?
Yeah, mentally preparing yourself. I think you do need to be really mindful because it's so easy. It's so counterintuitive to live that way.
Yeah.
Because our default is that if we're upset, we react. That's our default. So it's
Yeah.
completely counterintuitive to get upset and then say, I choose to let go. So I think just mentally preparing, especially if you're with someone or you're working with someone or you're in a relationship with someone where they're just hard work. And, of course, if you're in a relationship, a romantic relationship, that does make life a lot more difficult. And it's probably not a good idea to, keep going if that's the way it's always going to be. Unless you are in it for the long haul and say, I can be the mature one in this relationship and I can help this person heal and grow. If you're strong enough to do that, great. But, most people, most of us are not. So it is important to recognize that, when it is hard work, that it is going to weigh you down and, it's not going to be ideal for anyone.
Yeah.
So at the same time, if you're at work with a difficult person, it is important to mentally prepare yourself that, I am going to let go of the things that they say or the things that they do. I'm going to turn the other cheek and pretend I didn't see that or it didn't happen. But at the same time, finding an opportunity to communicate how the other person's actions or words are making you feel. Not in the heat of the moment because they will only get defensive. But, when things are calmer, to just say, the thing that you said the other day or the thing that you did the other day, this is how it made me feel. And just leave it at that. You're not criticizing them. You're not judging them. You're just sharing how it's made you feel. And that often, even if they defend themselves, they will go away and think about it. You don't have to wait for them to apologize just to make things right straight away because often they won't. But you can bet that they will go away and think about it.
Yeah, for sure. I know that, I'm not presently in a relationship, but my mother and I, we clash a lot because we are equally stubborn and kind of two sides of the same coin. So it's something that happens quite often, and I often find when I'm in an argument with her, I need to kind of just like remove myself from the situation, and like take however long I need. Sometimes that might be 5 minutes, sometimes that might be a few hours, figure out exactly how I feel, why I feel that way, and then like go back and try and explain that to her. And I know I'm a very temperamental person, so it's not very, very difficult. It takes a lot of effort for me to like actually step away and not keep going. But I know that it's kind of always resulted in a better outcome whenever I engage in that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It does require a lot of patience, to be patient and to be creative in how can I approach this differently so that it doesn't lead to the same outcome. Because it's amazing how often we do the same thing and expect it to change, but it doesn't. And we get disappointed. It's like, I've been down this road 100 times before and it's still not changing. So it is important. Yeah, what you're doing is so good that you do step away and think, how else can I approach this? What other ways can I communicate so that they understand? Or how can I understand them better as to why they are so stuck on this point?
Yeah. How do you deal with a partner that perhaps, like I said, we were talking earlier about like a difference in EQ, a partner that perhaps is not quite as inclined and not really at the same level of patience and understanding and compassion that you are. So they might perceive you, for example, walking away, or for example, communicating how you feel without judgment. They might perceive that negatively. How do you deal with that?
Or even, take you for granted is another most common thing that I get told that, what if they take you for granted? Here's the thing, role modeling is the best way to teach a person on how you are in the relationship and how they could be in a relationship, because people respond more than, they respond to your actions. So when you're role modeling, an understanding, compassionate attitude towards the other person, it's very difficult for them to hate you or be upset with you. But at the same time, you're not pushing down or pushing away or pretending that what they said or did is okay. You are needing to come back and deal with it, talk about it. But in that moment, reacting to it is not going to solve, because they're only going to get their defenses up and they're going to attack in return. So it is important to address whatever the differences are, but when you're both more calm. And, communicate it, think about how you want to communicate it so that it does come across as understanding, as caring, as kind as possible, saying that, when you do this, this is how it's making me feel, and this is why I'm reacting the way that I do. And really being clear about, how their actions and words are making you feel. So it's not about pushing it down, being a doormat, allowing them to take advantage of your good nature. But, you do need to communicate things that what they're doing is upsetting you, and being really clear about it. But arguing about it, it never causes someone to say, oh, you're right. I'm glad you told me off. Now I can go and change and I'll never do that again. People don't respond that way. They just defend themselves and offend back. Saying, well, you did this and you did that. So in order to break that cycle, it's important to just leave it and then come back and talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. How based on your experience, would you combine this practice with another one, perhaps, that might help make this better?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
So, for example, let's say, we were talking generally about, improving your EQ and developing your EQ. But say, for example, we're focusing on this example of, taking that break, taking that pause, and reassessing and reevaluating your feelings when you're calm, and when both parties are calm, rather. Is there something that you would combine with that specific example to perhaps make that either easier or make the most of its benefits?
Well, I can only talk personally in this case, and that is that I find praying to be very, very helpful. I find that when I am struggling to remain calm or see things clearly or find a solution to a really difficult situation, I find praying helps a lot. That, answers come that I could not have thought of it myself.
Sure.
So that would be my supporting, tool, if you like, in any kind of situation. I find prayer helps a lot.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. It makes you feel less alone, I suppose, in that situation.
It does, and it also gives you insights into situations that sometimes it's not humanly possible to know where it's coming from or what's caused, this situation to arise. And, I just feel that sometimes, my eyes just open. It's like, oh, of course, this is what happened and this is why he's now reacting the way that he is. So, yeah, sometimes answers come that I don't personally feel otherwise it would have been possible to know.
Yeah, for sure. All right, that brings us to the end of our debrief. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Definitely something to ponder on and think about, for sure. I'm going to move on now to our open mic, in which I let you kind of have a mini TED Talk about whatever you feel is important to chat about right now. And I may ask a few follow-up questions. I may not. We'll see. But right now, it's kind of your pedestal. So, Arsho, what did you want to talk about to close off the episode?
I would love to talk about the need for relationship skills in education. Teaching, I believe, especially senior high school students, where they are mature enough to understand and relate to relationship challenges and issues. as most, 17, 18-year-olds would already have experienced at some level, romantic relationship involvement. I think it's really important for them to have the skills to be equipped for a lifelong of healthy relationships, to be taught these relational skills in senior high school years as part of the curriculum. It needs to be a mandatory part of the curriculum. Because I come across so many clients who say, they teach you the 1, 2, 3s and the ABCs, but no one really teaches you how to do couple relationship, how to raise kids, what's important. It's like you're thrown into the deep end and you have to learn to swim. And in most cases, it's not until you've been hurt a few times that you begin to learn out of experience what works, what doesn't work, what to do, what not to do. And I think it would save a lot of people a lot of heartache if they learned what makes relationships work, how to improve a relationship that's not going well, what skills they need in order for the relationship to continue to improve and eventually become fulfilling and last even a lifetime. So I think it's really important that the education system recognizes the need for this and does implement relationship skills in schools.
I feel like there's so much that can fall under that umbrella as well. I mean, stuff like teaching basic respect. I don't think that respect is something that we learn very easily in school. And also, I think what abuse looks like. I don't think we're taught enough what abuse looks like and how trauma can affect the way we interact with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. Abuse can be so subtle. Emotional abuse, mental abuse can be so subtle, where the person doesn't even realize that their self-esteem is, slowly being diminished to the point where they, lose more and more of themselves and become more and more reliant on their partner. So I think absolutely those things need to be talked about. And what is, the damages of obsessive kind of, love, where quite often people think it's, a compliment when the other person doesn't want them to have their own friends, that they just want to keep them to themselves. They don't want you interacting with, others. And I think they don't realize that, that person is in the relationship for themselves. They're not in it for they don't care about your happiness. So I think it's really important. There's some really tough subjects that need to be talked about so that people become more aware and are able to recognize flags, when they see them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. I think, we get kind of like sex ed in school, but alongside that, I think like relationships and how we actually interact with other people is equally important.
Yeah, on a day-to-day basis. It's like, it's interesting that you say respect. It's like all respect goes out the window as soon as you have an argument when you're in a relationship, especially when you're in a committed relationship. It's like respect goes out the window, communication skills go out the window, and, emotions take over. And, learning to recognize that most relationships do, predominantly 3 phases. There's the forming phase, then comes the storming phase, and then comes the norming phase. As, Tucker had researched and found, is that most relationships, they give up or get stuck in the storming phase, where all the differences are being surfaced. The rose-colored glasses come off, and you're dealing with the day-to-day issues of being in a relationship with another human being. And it's like how to navigate through that difficult time and actually come out the other end better than before, instead of allowing the relationship to deteriorate. And there are specific skills that do that. And I have found that, Christianity has the blueprint for relationships when it says to let go of issues and, like turn the other cheek doesn't necessarily mean turn a blind eye to an abusive behavior. It just means that there are instances where you just need to let go of something that's really not that important when you think about in the bigger scheme of things, and how to communicate your needs in a way that the other person is more able to receive it rather than defend themselves over it. I think these things are really important skills to develop in any relationship. It could be workplace, it could be your own, original family relationships or romantic relationships.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. No, all of that was really wonderful. And thank you for sharing that with us, Arsho. Where can people in our audience find you?
They can visit my website, grassrootsapproach.com.au. My practice is in Sydney's Northern Beaches, as I said, Insight Counselling. So, I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or feedback or comments. I welcome it all. I consider everything self-development as part of it. So, I do welcome feedbacks of any kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I've had such a great time talking to you.
Thank you, Aditi.
You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Aditi Kutty. Thanks for tuning in.